Hi everyone, this is going to be a quick video to talk a little bit about APA stylistics so that you can have some helpful tips to keep in mind as you begin to compile your reference pages. Feel free to pause this video or rewind it or go back to a specific point if you want to spend a little bit more time on any of the information I cover. We're going to move at a pretty quick pace just so that we can get through the whole thing as quickly as we can. Okay, so to start with, we'll cover some basics. In APA, you'll have every citation basically being comprised of about 4 parts. So you have the author, the year, the title, and the publication information. Okay, all of these parts are normally present. There are some exceptions where they may be missing, and we will talk about how to handle those a little bit later in the presentation. So in general, they're formatted the same way. You have the author first, then you'll have the year in parentheses, you'll have the title, and then you'll have the publication information. And the way that that publication information is formatted will probably vary more than the other 3 sections, just because depending on what type of source it is, will tell you how things will be organized or italicized or what information will be included. The formatting is very, very important though, because it does tell your reader a lot. So just as an example, if we were going to be talking about a book source, whether the title was italicized or not would let your reader know whether you're talking about the entire book or just a chapter in it. Okay, and it is also important to note that each of these sections is followed by a period, so make sure you don't forget those. So to begin to look at each of these a little bit more closely, let's start by talking about how you format the author, or what information you include. When you write the author's name, you're always going to start with the first name, and you will write that first name out, and then you'll follow that with the initial. So first initial, if you have a first and middle name, you'll include them both. So for instance, Doe, J period, K period, and there would be a space between the J and the K. When you have multiple authors, you'll use that same format, but include them and connect them with the ampersand. So as you can see in the second example, when you have multiple authors, you just continue to use the commas and 1 ampersand before the final name. If you have a source with more than 7 authors, which is pretty rare, so 8 or more, you're going to want to consult your text or the Purdue OWL to see about setting that up. You'll be using ellipses. But since it is kind of a rare case, often just large research studies have that many authors. I'm not going to include that in this presentation. Now, another thing that's important is on your reference page, you will sort your sources in alphabetical order. When you're listing multiple authors, do not change the order of how the names are included. Just copy exactly the same order as the source shows. This is often because the lead researcher or the person who's maybe organized the project, done the most work, or who is the key person that someone can contact for additional information about it is often the first person listed. So you want to keep it in the order that the source lists your authors. All right, the second thing we are going to talk about here is the year. The year is probably the simplest thing to understand. In most cases, you're just going to use the year in those parentheses with a period after the parentheses. But when you have magazines and newspapers, and magazines and newspapers often don't have a lot of publication information because they're published daily, weekly, monthly. So you'll often include the month and the day there as well. So as you can see in the second example, 2011, October 1. And you don't want to abbreviate your month, spell the whole thing out there. The next is the title, and this is where you're really getting into where some of the formatting changes are important. So when you're writing the title, you should always have the first letter of the entire title italicized. The same thing with the subtitle, and the subtitle is the section that comes after the colon, the period over top of the other period. But the rest of the title should not be capitalized. So even if it's showing on the source that way or it's showing in the library when you're retrieving it that way, you do want to be consistent with APA style and make all of the other words in that sentence in the lowercase, except for proper nouns and, again, the first word of the title and the subtitle. Right? Now, when you're citing the entirety of a source, so if you think of big things like a book or a magazine or a journal or a television show or a website or an album, those are all in most cases. Those are going to be italicized. You're going to show this is the big thing. So big things in italics. Now, when you're just citing a section of a source, so a chapter of a book or an article in a magazine or a journal, a specific episode of a television show, or a specific song on an album, those smaller parts are not italicized. They should be left in plain text, as you can see in our second example there. Okay? That's very important to keep in mind because that will let your reader know what you're talking about. Now, if you are using just a part of a source, that doesn't mean you won't have the name of the larger part in italics. You'll just include that as part of your publication information, not part of the title of the source. Okay? Next, let's talk a little bit about the publication information. So, depending on which type of source you have, it's going to differentiate how you're organizing that publication information. Okay, so for instance, a location is going to be more important for a book, where a volume or issue might be more important for a periodical. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about those. I'm only talking here about books, periodicals, and websites. For other sources that you may be using, you want to check your text or the Purdue OWL to see exactly how to set those up. Okay, so when we're looking at books, you're simply going to include the information about who published the book. So after your title, you'll have the city, comma, the state, colon, and then the publisher. Now, if you are using a section in a book, you're going to want to go to the Purdue OWL because it is going to show you how to do an edited work or a chapter from a collection. Those are formatted a little differently, but the end is always the same. City, comma, state, colon, publisher, period. Periodicals, which are your journals, your magazines, your newspapers, they often include the volume, the issue, and the pages. Okay? So, and when you're putting those pages in there, you don't need to include the word page or a P, just put the numbers. So you can see in our example there that we have our title, we have in italics then the title of the periodical, comma, the volume, which is in italics, and then you'll notice squished right up against the volume is the issue, which is not italicized, and the issue is always just in the plain text. So it looks a little weird that you have something in italics and then something in plain text right after it, but keep them squished together and make sure you have each part italicized or not italicized as needed. After that, you'll have a comma by a dash. Notice that I do have an example there showing you how to do non-chronological pages, so you can see that example as well. You'll typically only find that in newspaper articles. Finally, I have your example here for websites. So websites are pretty simple. It's just finding all the information that you can. Make sure to go to the About Us section if you don't immediately see an author so that you can find out who this company or organization is. Because the author doesn't always have to be a person. It can be a group, an organization, or something along those lines. Okay, so you can see that you have your author, your year, your title, and then the words retrieved from, and then you'll have the URL or the HTTP and that whole list. Okay, do include the entire URL. That way your audience can click on it and read it immediately. Okay, so finally, this is the last part I want to talk about is in case you have some missing information. For instance, if you don't have an author, if your source has been published anonymously, you can just substitute the title in its place. Okay, so as you can see in our example here, we have the title, then the year, then the publication information. So we're just going to exclude it, okay, if you don't have an author. Now, if you don't have a date, you will include something in that space because the date is very important in APA style because they are very concerned of whether something is relevant and whether it's current or whether the information is outdated. Okay, so you can see here we still have our author, and then instead of the year, we just have the letters N period D period, which stands for no date. And then you can put your title and your publication information in. Okay, so that is some basics and some tips to keep in mind as you're compiling your reference pages. If you do have any questions, feel free to email me, and hopefully this will get you started on the right foot. Thanks.